The waiter insulted Tyler Perry in a luxurious restaurant, but what he did next left everyone stunned. Tyler Perry pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the Manhattan Royale, a high-end restaurant nestled in the heart of New York City. The establishment was known for its exclusivity, a place where only the wealthiest and most powerful dined. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above the marble floors, casting a golden glow over the restaurant's elite patrons. Soft jazz from a live pianist drifted through the air, blending with the murmur of conversations over fine wine and imported delicacies. Dressed in an old bomber jacket, a pair of faded jeans, and scuffed boots, Tyler looked nothing like the typical guests who frequented this establishment. His beard was neatly trimmed but beginning to gray, his hair slightly tousled from the crisp winter air outside. There was no arrogance in his posture, no entitlement in the way he walked. He didn't carry himself like a man who was used to demanding attention. Yet, despite his unassuming presence, there was something about him that made people take notice. Victoria Hughes, the restaurant's senior hostess, stood behind the polished wooden podium near the entrance. With her pristine uniform, sleek bun, and sharp, discerning gaze, she was the first line of defense for the Manhattan Royale's reputation. In her 10 years working here, she had seated A-list celebrities, Fortune 500 CEOs, and political elites. To her, this was more than just a job. It was a status symbol, a power she wielded with pride. When Tyler stepped forward, Victoria's eyes scanned him from head to toe, her professional smile tightening. She instantly categorized him. Not a regular, not wealthy, not VIP material. Her well-trained instincts told her he didn't belong. "Good evening, sir," she said, forcing a politeness into her voice. "How can I assist you?" Tyler met her gaze with an easy, polite smile. "I'd like a table for one, please." Victoria hesitated. Though the restaurant had plenty of open tables, especially near the grand windows with stunning views of the New York skyline, she had no intention of seating him anywhere prominent. She glanced at his worn-out jacket again, suppressing a smirk. "We have a strict reservation policy," she said smoothly. "Are you sure you're in the right place? Our menu is, well, quite exclusive." Tyler didn't flinch. "I'll take any available seat," he replied, his voice steady and calm. Victoria sighed as if she were doing him a great favor. "Very well," she said, turning sharply on her heel. She led him not to the main dining area, where chandeliers bathed guests in golden light, but to a dimly lit corner near the service entrance, where the noise from the kitchen and the clang of dishes were more pronounced. She set the menu in front of him with an audible thud. "This should be perfect for you," she said, her voice laced with artificial sweetness. "Let me know if you need anything. Though, just so you're aware, we have a minimum spending requirement." Tyler looked at her, his expression unchanged. "Thank you," he said simply, flipping open the menu. Across the room, a few guests exchanged glances. At one table near the center, an elderly gentleman dressed in a navy blue suit and his wife, adorned with elegant pearls, observed the scene. The man swirled his glass of Merlot, eyes narrowing as he watched Victoria's behavior. "That was completely unnecessary," he murmured to his wife. She nodded, her lips pursed. "He didn't even seem bothered. There's something about him," she whispered. "I wonder who he is." A few tables over, a young couple had also noticed. "She's being rude," the woman whispered to her partner. "He wasn't disrespectful or anything. He doesn't look like he fits in here," the man replied, though he seemed uneasy about the interaction. Meanwhile, Victoria watched Tyler from a distance, her arms crossed. She was certain he would leave as soon as he saw the menu prices. "People like him don't belong here," she thought. "Let's see how long he lasts." To her surprise, Tyler calmly studied the menu without a hint of hesitation. After a few moments, he raised a hand, signaling for her return. With exaggerated grace, Victoria walked back to his table. "Have you made a decision?" she asked, feigning boredom. Tyler pointed to one of the most expensive items on the menu. "I'll have the dry-aged Wagyu steak with truffle butter," he said. Victoria's eyes widened slightly before she quickly masked her surprise. The dish alone was priced at over $400. She let out a short, condescending laugh, covering her mouth as if trying to soften the insult. "Sir, just to confirm, you do realize the cost of that dish, correct?" she asked. Tyler's expression didn't change. "Yes," he said simply. "It sounds wonderful." For a brief moment, Victoria was speechless. She had expected him to fumble, to suddenly reconsider, to panic at the realization of the price. Instead, he remained composed. "Well," she said, pursing her lips, "I do hope you have a refined palate. Our chef prefers that dishes like these be appreciated properly." Tyler smiled slightly. "I'm sure it will be excellent." Victoria sighed dramatically and scribbled down the order. "Very well," she said. "Oh, and just so there are no misunderstandings later, the minimum tip expected here is 20%. Keep that in mind." Tyler nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." As Victoria walked away, she leaned toward a passing waiter and whispered, "He won't last through the appetizer. Mark my words." Across the room, the elderly gentleman in the navy blue suit observed the scene carefully. He took a slow sip of his wine before leaning toward his wife. "Something tells me this is about to get interesting," he murmured. The waiter returned a few moments later, placing an appetizer in front of Tyler, a delicately plated foie gras dish. Victoria watched intently as Tyler picked up his fork, expecting him to hesitate, to look confused, to realize he was out of his depth. Instead, he calmly took a bite, nodded approvingly, and continued eating as if he had dined here 100 times before. A flicker of irritation crossed Victoria's face. Why isn't he uncomfortable? She marched over to his table, planting her hands on her hips. "Enjoying your meal?" she asked, her voice just a little too loud, ensuring a few nearby tables could hear. Tyler looked up, his expression unreadable. "Yes, it's excellent," he said simply. Victoria tilted her head, her lips curling in a smirk. "You know, most people who order this dish don't actually enjoy it. It's a very acquired taste." Tyler wiped his mouth with his napkin and smiled. "I suppose it is," he said, "but I've always believed food is best enjoyed with an open mind." Across the room, the elderly gentleman set down his wine glass and leaned back in his chair, watching the exchange unfold. The tension in the room was growing, and more patrons were beginning to take notice. Victoria, growing frustrated at her inability to shake Tyler's composure, muttered under her breath to another server, "He'll ask for the check before the entree even arrives." But Tyler Perry wasn't going anywhere. A lesson was about to unfold, one that the Manhattan Royale and its staff would never forget. Victoria tapped her fingers against the podium, glancing toward the dimly lit corner where Tyler Perry sat, unfazed. She had expected him to show signs of discomfort, to second-guess his order, maybe even excuse himself from the restaurant. But instead, he sat there with a quiet confidence, eating his appetizer as if he belonged. The elderly gentleman in the navy blue suit observed the scene carefully, his sharp eyes following every move. His wife leaned in slightly. "It's remarkable, isn't it?" she murmured. "He hasn't reacted to anything." Victoria, now visibly irritated, decided to take things a step further. She approached Tyler's table with her notepad in hand, her voice carrying an unmistakable edge. "I see you're enjoying your appetizer. Ready for the main course, or would you prefer something simpler?" The words dripped with condescension, her implication clear. Tyler looked up at her, his expression unreadable, then nodded. "Yes, I'm ready. I'd like to continue with the Wagyu steak." Victoria forced a tight smile and scribbled down the order. "Excellent choice, though I must say, this dish is best appreciated by those with a refined palate." She turned on her heel and strode toward the kitchen, whispering to a coworker along the way, "Let's see if he can even finish it." Instead of placing the order immediately, she deliberately busied herself with other guests, chatting and laughing with an elegant couple near the center of the room, stopping to adjust the placement of silverware at another table. All the while, Tyler remained patient, his demeanor unchanged. The elderly gentleman watching from across the room took a slow sip of his wine, glancing at his wife knowingly. "She's making him wait on purpose," he murmured. "She wants him to feel unwelcome." Minutes turned into nearly half an hour before Victoria finally took his order to the kitchen. When the chef handed her the plated steak, she let it sit under the warming lamps, ensuring it lost some of its perfect temperature before delivering it. Finally, after what seemed like an intentional delay, she walked back to his table and set the plate down with a slight clatter. "Your meal, sir," she announced, her voice syrupy sweet. I do hope it meets your expectations. If not, we can always offer something more suited to your tastes." Tyler met her eyes, his expression steady, then picked up his knife and fork and cut into the steak. He took his time, chewing slowly, appreciating the flavors. "It's excellent," he said finally. "Please send my compliments to the chef." Victoria's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Glad to hear it." As she walked away, she muttered under her breath to a nearby waiter, "He's pretending to be polite, but I know he's uncomfortable. He doesn't belong here." The young waiter, clearly uncomfortable with her words, hesitated before responding. "Maybe he just wants to have dinner," he said quietly. Victoria scoffed. "Did you see the boots he's wearing? He doesn't belong here, and frankly, if he can't handle it, he shouldn't have walked through the door." The waiter said nothing, but his discomfort was evident. Across the room, the elderly couple watched the scene unfold. The woman shook her head. "She's being cruel," she whispered, "and he's being nothing but polite." By now, other guests were beginning to take notice. Conversations had quieted, subtle glances were exchanged. A younger couple sitting nearby whispered to each other, "Why is she acting like that? He hasn't done anything wrong." A well-dressed woman 2 tables away murmured, "He must be someone important to stay this calm." Her companion nodded. Or maybe he's just stronger than she realizes. Victoria, still determined to get some kind of reaction, returned to Tyler's table as he finished his steak. "So," she asked, her voice just loud enough for surrounding tables to hear, "did it meet your expectations?" Tyler looked at her, his gaze steady. "It was excellent. Please tell the chefs they did an impeccable job." Victoria's lips parted slightly in surprise before she quickly masked it with another forced smile. As she turned away, she muttered, "Let's see if he's still smiling when he gets the bill." A few minutes later, she returned with the check, placing it in front of him with a satisfied smirk. "Whenever you're ready." Tyler reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a sleek black card and handed it to her without a second thought. She hesitated for just a moment before taking it. When she glanced down at the card, her expression changed. Her eyes darted back to his face, and for the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered across her features. She swallowed, suddenly uneasy, and turned toward the register. The elderly gentleman in the navy blue suit leaned back, watching closely. His wife gave him a knowing look. "It's about to happen," she whispered. Victoria returned moments later, placing the receipt on the table with noticeably less confidence. "Thank you for dining with us," she said, her voice quieter than before. Tyler picked up the pen, signed the check, and stood. He slipped on his jacket and turned to face her. The restaurant, now eerily quiet, seemed to hang on the moment. "I appreciate the service," he said calmly, meeting her gaze. "But next time, consider treating every guest with kindness, regardless of how they look." Victoria's face paled slightly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The room felt heavier now, the weight of her actions catching up with her. Tyler nodded once, then turned toward the exit. As he walked away, the elderly gentleman raised his glass in a silent toast, a knowing smile playing on his lips. His wife leaned in. "That," she said softly, "was remarkable." Victoria, standing frozen by the podium, swallowed hard as the realization hit her. This night and the lesson she had just learned would not be easily forgotten. As the doors of the Manhattan Royale swung shut behind Tyler Perry, an unmistakable tension remained in the air. Conversations that had once flowed effortlessly over glasses of aged wine and plates of caviar now faltered. Guests whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that ranged from curiosity to quiet admiration. The elderly gentleman in the navy blue suit took a final sip of his wine, placing his glass down with a soft clink. "That was something, wasn't it?" he murmured to his wife, who nodded, a knowing smile on her lips. Meanwhile, Victoria Hughes stood motionless near the host stand, staring at the signed check in her hand. A small bead of sweat traced its way down the back of her neck as realization sank in. The black card Tyler had handed her, the one she had barely given a second thought to, wasn't just any card. It belonged to someone who not only belonged in this restaurant, but to someone who quite literally owned places like this. She felt a cold wave of embarrassment wash over her. The restaurant manager, Christopher Lane, A well-groomed man in his mid-50s with a demeanor of quiet authority stepped forward. He had witnessed enough of the evening's events from a distance, and now, with his hands neatly clasped behind his back, he addressed Victoria in a tone laced with restrained disappointment. "Miss Hughes, would you mind stepping into my office for a moment?" The words sent a ripple of tension through the remaining staff. Victoria hesitated, her face draining of color. The once unshakable confidence she had wielded throughout the evening was now replaced with an uneasy stiffness in her posture. She swallowed hard, then nodded, following Christopher through the restaurant, past the curious stares of diners who had taken notice of the unfolding situation. Inside the office, the air was heavy. Christopher leaned against the desk, arms crossed, and let out a slow breath before speaking. "I've seen many things in my years of managing this establishment, but tonight was unexpected. Do you realize who that was?" Victoria's hands clenched at her sides. She began, but Christopher held up a hand, silencing her. "That was Tyler Perry," he continued, his voice calm but firm. "A man who has built his name, not just in entertainment, but in philanthropy, in business, in giving people opportunities. A man who has done more for communities than most people in this city could ever dream of." He let the weight of his words settle before continuing. "And you treated him like he was beneath this place." Victoria's stomach tightened. "I didn't know," she whispered, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Christopher shook his head, exhaling sharply. "That's exactly the point. You didn't know, and yet you judged him. You assumed his worth based on his appearance. This restaurant, this industry, is about hospitality. It's about treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their wallet, their wardrobe, or whether they look like the kind of guest you think they should be." His voice softened just slightly, but the disappointment remained. "You let your bias cloud your professionalism, and in doing so, you embarrassed yourself, this restaurant, and frankly, me." Victoria's hands trembled slightly. I didn't mean to," she said, her voice small now, stripped of the arrogance it had carried earlier in the evening. Christopher studied her for a moment, then let out a quiet sigh. "Miss Hughes, I don't believe you are beyond redemption, but tonight should serve as a very important lesson." He turned toward the office door before adding, "Take the rest of the evening to reflect on this. We'll discuss your future here tomorrow." Without another word, he stepped out, leaving Victoria alone, the weight of the evening pressing down on her shoulders. Back in the dining area, whispers still floated among the remaining patrons. The elderly gentleman in the navy blue suit exchanged glances with his wife before gesturing for the waiter. "Would you be so kind as to let your chef know that tonight's meal was excellent?" he said warmly. The young waiter nodded, grateful to have a moment of normalcy amidst the lingering tension. Meanwhile, outside, Tyler Perry walked down the quiet New York street, hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the crisp night air. He had long since learned that wealth and success didn't grant immunity from judgment. People still assumed, still placed value on appearances. But that had never mattered to him. He knew his worth. He knew that kindness, true kindness, was never about how one looked. It was about how one acted. And as he walked under the glowing city lights, he couldn't help but hope that tonight, at least one person had learned that lesson too. The waiter insulted Tyler Perry in a luxurious restaurant, but what he did next left everyone stunned.